Last month, I had the opportunity to be a guest on the Insidious Agenda, true crime slash paranormal podcast, hosted by the amazing storyteller Nick Betts. After spending time getting to know Nick a bit via email and during our actual interview, I decided I wanted to interview Nick for an episode of All Is Not Lost. This is a very different direction for All Is Not Lost, a little deviation from our usual content, and the episode is quite a bit longer than usual. But if you are interested in digging deep into learning about the man behind the microphone, stick with us today. I really value and enjoy the way Nick presents his stories and the effort he puts into them. He absolutely does not just throw these chapters, as he refers to them, together. Nick does hours of research beyond many of the other versions of these stories we may have heard, and he prides himself on impeccable editing, so that what you hear is nothing short of podcast excellence. During the time I was interviewing Nick, I got to learn so much more about him as Nick the person before getting into Nick the storyteller. Nick takes us on a very personal journey, beginning in his youth, through his middle school years and difficulties and challenges that come with that time, on through his university and military experiences. He also digs into the challenges of mental illness and learning to navigate a life with anxiety, which I know I can relate to at times. We take a sharp turn at this point where we dive into what got Nick started on podcasting, who was his motivation, and what each special chapter of the Insidious Agenda podcast brings to him, and also what he hopes it will bring to you. As always, my hope is that someone out there can find a sliver of meaning from this show that makes a difference in their lives, and that is no different today. I hope that as you listen to the ups and downs of Nick's journey, that some part of it either resonates with you, motivates you, or at least gets you thinking about something in a new way. I will, of course, post links to Nick's podcast and email in the show notes. I will also post a link to all of his social media accounts. Please head over to the Insidious Agenda podcast and have a listen. If you love true crime and the paranormal, you won't be sorry.
Spirit. Does it stay? Does it go?
The fact is, spirit does survive death. Our loved ones are all around us. Love survives. Spirit survives. All is not lost.
Welcome to the All Is Not Lost podcast. Here's your host, psychic and evidential medium, Rianne Maldonado.
After breakfast, and anyway, that's what I brought down with me. And every time every time I have it, I realize that, you know what, I like spiced tea, or even to the extreme, like some chai tea. Like I'm not really big on them, because I find it's nice just to have a tea that's like kind of mellow and chill, and chai tea is the opposite of that.
Peppermint tea this morning. Do you want to go get a new tea?
No, that's cool.
Okay.
I was working at one of your hiatus, and then what was I going on about? That's it.
Okay, this is totally on a funny personal note.
Yeah, give her.
My kids are fascinated that you're Canadian. They watch some Canadian TV shows. Okay, and they want me to ask you how you pronounce this word, so I'm going to spell it.
Okay, for sure. No, that's perfect. Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I'm a bit different too, because it's you can hear a little bit East Coast in my voice as well.
Okay.
I try to. Well, I mean, for this, I'm trying to tone it down a little bit, and then when I actually get into the full-on podcast voice, you don't get it at all.
Oh,
so,
you should do it today. Be Nick today. Okay. Decal.
Decal.
The things you. Oh my God. Okay.
Decal. Yeah.
That drives them nuts. They heard that on a TV show and they're like, Mom, it's a decal. And they're like, no, it's a decal. And oh my God. So they're like, you got to ask Nick how he says this. Okay. They're going to love it.
Yeah. It's decal. And even like, geez, I know there's lots of words. My sister actually used to date a guy from Philly. And anyway, like just some of the things that he would say, like we look at up here and we're like, what are you guys even going on about? Like so like I know for us, like the word house, like
Yes.
it's not house, it's house. And then even like, so even the what was another one? The word, oh geez, it exists in the States, wooder. It's like, so I don't know where wooder comes from. It must be like an Eastern American thing. Cause I mean, it's water. Like
water.
I don't know
Yeah,
where
I've
water.
never heard it the other way. Water. Oh, I know what you're saying. Like water. Yeah, I've heard people be like, "Oh, I need a glass of water," and I'm like, "You need a glass of what?"
Yeah, it's water, and then for us, like from Eastern Canada, there's about 6 A's before you actually get into the rest of the word. So it's water. Yeah.
Okay.
Or the geez, what was another one? Roof. I guess I used to hear him say roof.
Roof. Yeah, I hear people
like
say roof.
R-U-F, like roof.
Yeah, like, are you a dog?
No.
Roofing?
Yeah. Yeah. And then other than that too, we spell a lot of words with you.
I've noticed.
So like,
yes.
yeah, color and honor and valor and all that. Yeah, like, because it's, I mean, we use the old, of course, British style, right? But
sure.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for indulging my children on that. They're going to be so fascinated when I'm done.
I'm sure I'm sure some of our Canadian Americans, or also known as like the people from Toronto, I'm sure they probably say decal.
Okay.
But no, it's decal for sure.
So that is so crazy. You know, I learned a lot when I went to England last year. You know, they have no problem correcting me. Everybody in England would tell me right away if I was saying something incorrectly. But I would like text myself different words that they use in England, so I would remember to come home and tell the family. So it's just fun. Thank you so much for doing that.
Oh no, geez, that's absolutely perfect. And and you say they watch like some Canadian TV stuff as well?
Yeah, I guess there's I'll have to ask them, and I'll just message you someday what it is they watch. But a few films a few shows were filmed in Canada. And I've noticed a lot of home shows are filmed in Canada. So but my kids pick up on these little differences and then they fixate. They're like, that's so cool. So yeah, they're like, you got to ask Nick. Last time they were mad at me that I forgot to ask you.
So a big Canadian TV show. I know a lot of people are familiar with it now, but the Trailer Park Boys. So if you've ever gotten into watching the Trailer Park Boys,
okay,
that's the Trailer Park Boys were actually filmed like the entire, well, probably up to season 7.
Wow.
It was like, it got its start in my hometown in Cole Harbour, Nova Scotia.
Wow.
Yeah, so it was all like, so the first 7 seasons are all filmed right in Nova Scotia around where I grew up and everything like that. So it's really
cool.
It's really neat to see, like, there's a part even in season 7 early on when they're selling stolen meat in a liquor store parking lot, and the camera kind of like pans around and you can see a grocery store in the background, and I'm like, yeah, I used to work there. That's Sobeys.
That's crazy.
So,
how fun is that?
Yeah, okay. So they're a big deal. And then other than the Trailer Park Boys, and do you know hockey very much? Is that like a big thing for you guys?
I've been to one Red Wings game with an ex-boyfriend years ago.
So if your kids watch hockey at all, or really anybody in your family, they'll know the name, but I share the same hometown as Sidney Crosby from the Pittsburgh Penguins.
Or
even closer to you guys, I guess, Nathan McKinnon from the Colorado Avalanche. We're all from Cole Harbour. Yeah.
That's so fun. How cool is that? Okay. Well, good. I got lots of local info. That's super fun.
For sure.
Okay. Well, Nick, we should dive right in because you gave me so many great things to talk about. I cannot wait for you to expand on a lot of these topics. I love getting to know new people, and I felt that after you interviewed me and we had time to chat, really a good connection with you. And I think you're a super cool guy and I love what you do. So I'm super excited for you to tell us all about who is Nick and all about the Insidious Agenda podcast and how you got from here to there.
You and me both. I think it's going to be fun.
Yeah. All right. So I guess start with the beginning, Nick. Tell us who you are and where it all began for you.
So for me, you would have read my bio. Just a small, simple fella from Cole Harbour, Nova Scotia. We're put on the map largely by Sidney Crosby of the Pittsburgh Penguins, and as I just talked about, the Trailer Park Boys are another one. So they're all from home. So growing up, I was involved in lots of sports. I think I've played everything under the sun, whether I've loved it, like the 10 years of basketball that I played, or the 1 year of soccer and then hung up those cleats. That was the end of that. But outside of that, growing up, I was involved in Scouts Canada was a big thing for me. Never had a whole lot of friends. Used to ride a lot of bikes and stuff like that, and had a great time. But one thing for me, I've never had a big circle of friends. I used to have actually this one kid, Curtis, and Curtis was my best friend right from when I started school at 5 until probably the end of grade 7. But outside of that, really nothing too exciting. I was part of the earlier wave of millennials that began to grow up without technology, and then of course grew into it as it started coming about. So we're still in that generation where our parents wanted us to go to university and go to school. So we're in between that Gen X, but then we're also in between the Gen Z who figured out technology and figured out that they don't have to go to school and work. They can just be YouTube stars. So missed that wave a little bit, but that's okay. Going through school, it was never really a big thing for me. School came very easy at all grades. I was never really into trying to do hard or good work in school. My apologies. But I always did well enough to be considered a great student, especially in high school. Like, I never really applied myself. I was one of those kids that people could be envious of because I could write a paper and hand it in on the first draft, get an 80, and that was fine for me. I didn't need the 90s. I didn't need the A's. Because I was going to get into university either way. As long as you did decent, that's where I was heading. So my parents wanted me to go to university. As a kid, I wanted to be cool things, like an astronaut and a marine biologist. And then realism hit in high school, and that's when I wanted to do more realistic things, like be a teacher. And it was when I got to university that things kind of changed for me. I had a very hard time leaving high school. Little bit of an identity crisis, not knowing what I actually wanted to do. And then as I was going through university, I actually skipped a lot of classes, didn't go. My first semester, I probably skipped about 60% of my entirety of my classes. Still met my deadlines, still handed papers in, still did the exams and did the readings, and did perfectly fine. I had a GPA over 3, which for me going through high school and everything was no different than it was before. I was happy just meeting the cutoff. It didn't really matter to me. And like the people that did have the opportunity to apply themselves to school, I found usually weren't working and things like that. I was big into work, trying to get in all of the hours and the money that I could, because once I got out of like part-time high school money and do a bit more university money, then I was like, okay, let's work as much as we can, and let's start living and partying and doing all this fun stuff. And so I worked, and the work paid for booze, and the work paid for workout supplements, and basically time to hang out with my friends. So I got to the point where I would even skip classes just to pick up extra shifts. So university was not a place I wanted to be, and that was fine for me. I was never 100% sold on it. And looking back at it now in retrospect, I think it was because my parents told me my whole life that I was going to go to university and go that route and get a good job. But I don't know if that's what I ever really wanted. Because after school, like I didn't think about it. I didn't stop to smell the roses. It's just high school ended, and then 2 months later, university was starting. And that was it. That was all I had known growing up. So after that, I only survived in university for probably a year and a half. The entirety of my first semester of year 2 was a joke. I didn't go. I took a lot of personal days, a lot of time off, again, taking extra shifts. Sometimes it was just hanging out in my buddy's house and playing video games because he wasn't doing secondary education. So, you know what, I thought, you know what, let's go. We'll rock a pizza at lunch and play some NHL on the Xbox. Like, you know, like getting ready for that next stage in life. All of the things that were important was what I was doing. So I decided, you know what, it's time to leave university. I just didn't know what I was going to do. And of course, I also feared what might come from my parents when I tell them, like, I don't know what I want to do, but I know it's not university. So eventually I found my way into the recruiting center of the Canadian Armed Forces. And throughout high school in grade 11, I went and did career day. And I remember going in for career day and they said, oh, like, what would you want to do if you joined the military? I said, oh, well, like, I'm pretty good with stuff in history and like English and stuff. So like, maybe I could teach people things. And I remember them telling me, you know, that's not actually a job. So my hopes were kind of dashed there. But I did go and I did do the aptitude test when I was in grade 11, qualified for every job in the military except for one, because math was never my strong suit. So I was never going to do anything in aeronautics anyway. But that basically went by the wayside. And then probably would have been January of 2010 is when I actually filled out the application and submitted it and went through that process. And then shortly after, in February, is when my parents' house almost melted to the ground when I told them that I hadn't been going to school and I hadn't been doing well, and I withdrew from a couple of classes because I didn't want to be there. So it was all about, you know, trying to find something in life and actually move into that. I didn't want to join the military. I can tell you that absolute hand to heart. I did not want to join the military. But it was a way to, one, get adult money, and two, it was a way to get out of my parents' house, which I didn't want to be in. I wanted to be out doing my own thing. Like I told you, I skipped class to go hang out and work and do stuff, and you had that little kiss of freedom and then just want to get out of there. Well, I can tell you that the military was not the kiss of freedom that I was looking for. In all honesty, it was not. So the one thing about joining the military, the biggest thing, is the culture shock. You are not in control of yourself. You are not in control of what you want to do or where you want to go. And that is especially true when you go through basic training. Although it's not like everybody sees in movies, it is not Full Metal Jacket, it is not Jarhead. It might be down in the United States, but up here it is not. We have these 2 green doors that are on the front entrance of our basic training building called the Mega. And it all takes place in Saint-Jean-sur-Richelieu in Quebec. And once you pass those green doors for the next 4 weeks, you are not leaving. That is home. So our basic training takes place over the span of 3 months, or 3.5 months as it was back when I went through it. And I will tell you, I had trouble getting off the ground. I went, and a week and a half in, I fractured my ankle. I got recoursed, so I basically got put into holding. And the whole time you're in holding, you're stuck there. They let you go out on the weekends and stuff, but you are stuck there. So that was about the end of January. I didn't get back on a course until that March. But when I went through, I came back at it with new conviction. When I graduated in June, 2 days before my 20th birthday, my 21st birthday, I was able to I was presented the award, the most improved candidate, because I came at things pretty hard. And that's a theme, as I tell all of these stories going through the military and things like that, that's going to be a recurring theme, is suffering, redemption, and excelling. And you'll see that as we go. So after I finished basic training, I ended up at CFB Gagetown, just outside Fredericton in the province of New Brunswick. And there I did another trades course 2 months later, another career course 2 months later. And then I was back in holding for another 3 months. Now at this time, as long as you show up on time and you look how you're supposed to look and you quack like a duck, you're good to go. Like, everybody leaves you alone. It's fine. Nothing crazy. And then I went on my career course as a combat engineer. And that's when I went through probably the hardest 4 months of my life, was going through that. And it was incredibly difficult. We weren't treated well, but it's a very high stress, and let me correct myself. Like, it's not that we weren't treated well. It's you have to be treated a certain way because the job that you're doing is incredibly tough and demanding. And if you do certain things wrong, people die. And it's as simple as that. So they wanted to teach you fundamentals. They wanted to teach you under high stress. Although, having gone through it now, I don't think those two things go together, because trying to absorb things under entire crazy mental duress was nuts. And then I graduated in April of 2012. And I stayed in the Gagetown area like I wanted to, and moved into an apartment in Fredericton with my girlfriend at the time, who many, many years later is now my wife. I actually met her shortly after I got to Gagetown that July. And in September, we actually got together officially and have been together ever since. So something good did come out of all of that suffering. And now, depending on how you look at things, it's changed suffering, or married suffering, I guess now. But that's fine. I love her to death. She's been there for me through so many tough times. But I digress. So when I finished my career course, I thought, you know what? The world's my oyster. Now I'm going to be able to do stuff. And it was nice being out in the world. But at 21 years of age, you are not ready for the world. You might think you are, but you're not. At my first unit, I didn't really mesh well with anybody. My interests were different than a lot of people's. I didn't live near the base, so I didn't hang out with a lot of the guys. We had nothing in common. I didn't want to spend every night drunk. I had absolutely zero desire to do that. So I never really went to a lot of things. I kind of went and did my work and then drove home, and that was it. Now, that 2 years that I was there, I had thought before that my combat engineer course that I went through was incredibly tough. But these 2 years were the hardest. It would have been the middle of 2012 to the middle of 2014. And the reason why it was tough is because, as much as I thought I wasn't ready to be out on my own. I really was not. And whether that was me not having grown up enough, or whether it was the environment I was put into, or most likely a combination of everything, it was not where I should have been. And it was not a good launch spot. And it was in a job that I wasn't good at. So the toughest thing for me going through there, and I will say this hand to heart, that I was not a good combat engineer. I knew it. I realized it, but I made a commitment, so I had to ride it out. I couldn't just, I want to change jobs right now. I want to leave. Like, there's none of that. You made a commitment for at least 3 years. We're going to see it through. Now, with that, I had some good leaders, and I had some of the most horrible people I've ever met in my life. And I absolutely mean that. Not just because I wasn't good at my job. I do realize parts of that, but there are certain people in this world, I just believe, that are just not genuinely nice, caring people. And anyway, I found a few of them, and it was tough. I had a lot of issues those first 2 years. Kathleen, my wife, could even tell you how many days I came home and really didn't want to go back there the next day. But again, made a commitment, got to tough it out and go through it. And mind you, some of those people that I thought were bad people then, I still think are bad people now, even though I haven't seen them in 10 years. But yet there's other people I knew that were very hard on me then, that I know now they were trying to teach me something. And the military of 2012 is a lot different than the military of 2022. So we were also in that transition time of the older school way of thinking that you see in like the movies and all that kind of stuff, to the new age. Okay, we realize people are humans now and they come with human things. So it was tough, but I take away a lot of lessons from those first 2 years. The chiefest of which is being genuinely nice to people. And if you can't be nice, you stay out of the way. It's almost like that one thing of it's the line you cross of road rage, of swearing in your car versus opening the door and going up to somebody's window. It's like crossing that line. So I truly believe that like it pays to be a good person. And the one thing I really learned from the military, at least from those early years, and it got me into the train of thinking, is that to be a good leader, you take the good things that you've learned from leaders that you've had coming up through, and you learn from the bad ones. And that way you know how to treat people and how to get the best out of people. That being said, this isn't a complete sob story of woe is me and the world was against me and all that. I'm really trying to shape it as more lesson learning and enlightening and coming up from, well, let's say humble beginnings to a horrific first time in my career. And then in July of 2014, actually finding where I fit. So I went through, when I was able to, an occupation transfer that I submitted like 6 months in advance. And this comes back to people just being bad. Like my contract was coming up. My time in the military might have been ending. And I tried for this occupation transfer. And somehow in the 4 months before it was due that I submitted it, it got lost. Don't know where, don't know how, doesn't matter. But I had one guy go to bat for me. He was my section second in command, a guy named John Butler. To this day, I believe that John Butler has probably said the one thing that was the biggest influence in not only my career and my life, and it was all in one sentence. And I believe, and I have applied it to many different parts of my life. And what John told me was, if you're not happy with something in your life, do something about it. And it was as simple as that. And you can apply that to anything. So what John told me then, and I went through it, I had to run through a grievance process, but eventually paperwork was raised again. Fast forward a few months, I ended up getting my occupation transfer, and I got into a different trade that was based in administration and human resources, which is a lot of what I did before I actually joined the military. Just 1 second, I'm just gonna grab a drink here right quick. And so from there, I ended up having to go through trades training again because I was in a new trade. So I ended up going off to Ontario, and I was there for 3 months. And it was incredibly tough leaving. I'll touch on a bit later in the interview why things are so hard for me to leave and people are so hard for me to leave. But it was incredibly tough going there. And I remember on the drive out, I remember saying, okay, let's look at this as an opportunity to completely flip the script. All of the people in the last 2 years who have said that you never amount to nothing, you're in the wrong place, you're doing the wrong things, let's prove them wrong. Although I will say I was doing the wrong thing and I knew that. I literally had a come to Jesus moment in the back of an armored vehicle. I ended up getting hurt on a bridge build site that we were doing, and we were already strapped for people, so I knew coming out of it they were even going to be more shorthanded. But this bridge build took us 24 hours, and we ended up not even pulling the thing back across and basically tearing it down. We ended up getting it set up. We had 30 minutes at the end of it to catch rest, although I wasn't able to get any rest because they had me running around doing different other things. Go figure. But when we were in the middle of the night, I remembered looking out at everybody, and I remembered thinking to myself, you know what? I'm not a combat engineer. Those guys are. I am not. And I know in my heart of hearts that I wasn't. So it was at that moment that I knew, okay, you know what? It's time to try something else. And that's what kind of got me into my new trade. And I can go through the 7 or 8 years of that, but I'll just hit the high points. So through there, when I finished that course in December, I finished as the top candidate voted on by our course, and I received for the top candidate 19 out of 20 first, like, top candidate votes. The only one that didn't vote for me was myself, because I could never bring myself to do that. And so anyway, I won the top candidate award, found out my posting. I was going home to Halifax, which was great. My wife actually at the time preferred to come out to Edmonton, where we're at now, like something out west where there'd be a lot more job prospects and things like that. But we went home. We went to Halifax. She's from about an hour and a half outside of the city, so it was kind of like going home for her too. And then through there, I had great experiences. My first posting to a ship was the HMCS Athabascan, which is now decommissioned. From there, I met 3 of my best friends nowadays. So shout out to Ryan, Alex, and Chris. And they have been a big part of my life for a number of years now. And we've had a running group chat since probably about 2017, since my wedding. And it's not as busy as it used to be, but that being said, everybody's doing their own stuff, and Brian has a daughter now, and Chris has another daughter, and Alex is getting ready for a big career change here in the next little bit. So we don't chat as much as we used to, but I'm thankful that I met the 3 of them while I was sailing. The end of 2017, I had a big sail over to Europe. I was over there for about 3 months sailing around. Kathleen got to come visit me in the middle of that trip, and we had a nice trip through Belgium and then to Paris. And even though we were only there for a short time, it was really nice, and the Navy afforded us a lot of great opportunities. And then I was finally done. I wanted to hang up my sea boots. So I was able to get a posting with the Air Force, my first posting with the Air Force in 2018. And I didn't know it going into it. But that next year and a half, professionally, was about to be the best year and a half I think anybody could ever experience. I worked incredibly hard. I had a bunch of volunteer opportunities that I took part in. I really bought into the unit ethos. We had a great commanding officer, great deputy, great squadron chief. But even in our orderly room, my administration officer, Heather Constantine, and my chief clerk, Kevin Symes, were both amazing people. Heather I still talk to this day, and Heather was a bit of a mentor in my career. And little did I know, but Heather, that November, after we'd been working together for 11 months, Heather had put me up for an award, and I was named the inaugural, and this was for 2018, the inaugural Logistician of the Year, which the logistics branch in the Canadian Forces is massive. So I was very fortunate to, one, have been thought of well enough to even be nominated for that award. And at the same time, in a little bit of awe, because 4 years ago, I was in one of the darkest places I had ever could have been. Fast forward 4 years later, and I had reached the pinnacle. Like I was the guy. So in a 4-year swing, I went from 0 to hero, at least in my own mind, which was perfect. So that February in 2019, I went and accepted the award in Borden, Ontario, at the close of the 50th anniversary of the logistics branch. And it was in front of, and as an introvert, this was earth shattering in my little brain, 1,500 people. And I don't remember a lot of it. I remember when my name got called, and I blacked out until I left. Like, like there's pictures of me standing up there accepting the award and stuff. I don't remember a lick of it to this day. Completely blacked out. I hope I said a couple of words to the general when I was up there trying to accept this thing. But in all honesty, it was a great experience. And then after that, I went to probably another one of, I won't say the worst places, but another one of my least favorite postings ever. I won't get into why. It doesn't really matter. But I was fortunate enough at the time to be posted there with one of my best friends, Matt. Matt was my junior, and we were together for about a year. We were together through the initial first parts of COVID, from March when the world shut down. And then that August, we were both posted. So Matt left and went to Ontario, and I came to where I'm at now in Edmonton, Alberta. And then I was terrified to go to the unit that I was posted to because it was an infantry unit, and my last combat unit, which was my first one, was, again, the worst part of my life. But it was certainly an opportunity to learn the phrase, don't judge a book by its cover, because the unit turned out really well. There were some hiccups in terms of personnel that, I won't get into because it doesn't serve a purpose. But I learned a lot there. I got overwhelmed with a lot of things because I was also the acting battalion sergeant for 9 months while ours was deployed. And all of that together just rode me into the ground. And when that time came is when, or even I guess before then, I had actually started looking at leaving the military. So, probably if I had to put a timeline to it, February 2021 is when I started looking at leaving. That June I did an interview for a job, and I didn't end up getting it. Lost a little bit of hope, and talked about leaving the military. And anyway, they said, okay, well, if we send you to a place that's a little bit lower readiness, a little bit lower tempo, what'd you think about staying? And I said, well, you know what? I think it would buy a little bit more time. My intent is to ultimately leave the military for reasons. But I think that it would at least buy the calf a year. So they sent me to another place that was low tempo. It was great, treated extremely well there. I was in an orderly room with only one other lady. She was wonderful. Her name was Leanne, so I don't know if she'll be listening, but Leanne, if you hear it, I love you and I miss you. You were awesome. And that January, so I had got there in October, and the end of January 2022 was when I had got a call from the place that I had interviewed for. And I didn't know it, but as part of that job process, they were creating a pool. So from that pool, they pulled me for another job and asked me if I'd be interested. So I said, well, yeah, like I'll hear it out. Why not? I didn't have to interview for it again, but the hiring manager wanted to know if I'd be a right fit for it. So anyway, we sat and we talked for 15, 20 minutes. And anyway, offered me the job, which, it was a big pay cut from what I was earning in the military. But it tied in with the reasons why I was leaving. So one is I wanted a new challenge. Aside from a new posting, a new unit, a deployment, I wanted a new challenge. Number two is because I wanted the flexibility of making my own decisions again. I didn't want to be riding out trying to figure out when I'd be away next, whether that's going to the field, going on a tasking, going on a course, going on a deployment. I didn't want any of that hanging over my head because, as I mentioned before, it's really hard for me to go away, and I become an emotional wreck every time I do. So I wrote out my military career full-time and left on the 2nd of September, just this year passed in 2022. Still kept on in the primary reserve, so I only go in one night a week, use my expertise to help them further their mission and their goals and stuff. But for me, that'll be the extent of it, at least for the next little while I contemplate whether I want to stay full-time or not. And then the job that I left for, I'm actually now employed as a project officer with the Royal Canadian Mounted Police here in Edmonton. It was important to me to find an organization that was kind of like the military, at least structured the same way. So the police, although they're not the same, they still follow a kind of divisional system like the military did. I understand the chain of command aspect, reporting structures, everything. So the RCMP too, for me, had a lot of prestige. It's an old organization, and although the past is marred by some of the things from when Canada was young, and of course policing nowadays too has its own set of challenges, but it was important to find an organization with prestige and have the opportunity for upward growth or lateral mobility if I so choose. And I find that I've settled in well there. I've made some great friends. One of them I think will be a lifelong friend, as him and I get along real well. So after I left, I was terrified, but in retrospect, I couldn't have landed anywhere better than I did. Still trying to decide if I do like the work or not. I know my life is a constant reevaluation of everything. And I firmly believe that if you're not constantly reevaluating things, you're cheating yourself, even if you are happy. And of course,
I agree with that 100%, that we have to always reevaluate all the time. What worked for us last week or last month or last year might not necessarily be what works for us from here on out. And it's important to be able to stop and assess and not think that's a bad thing. You know, I don't know about you, but I've been told in my life that, you know, I was a quitter, or I should get one job and stick to it for 40 years because that's the way people used to think. But I don't feel that that is the best way to go about life. You know, I think that we have to learn and grow and experience and test the waters and try new things. And your journey, you know, you weren't clear what you wanted to do in some areas. You knew what you didn't want. You knew what you did want in other ways. And you wouldn't have had the same appreciation or knowledge today having not gone through those things. And I can relate to some of them. I was similar to you in school, that school came easy to me. I wanted to get out in the real world. I don't know about in Canada, but in the US, high school is 4 years. I found a way to break the mold, and I went to college at night my last year of high school, and I graduated in 3 years because I too wanted to get out in the world. I felt I had something bigger to do than just sit in that high school classroom. Now, about your career with the military and the police, you know, I can't relate personally, but as we've talked before, my husband was in the Navy and my husband was a police officer. And so I can hear little bits and understand some of it, you know. And when you were talking about being 21 years old and not ready for the real world, you know, my husband talks about that when he was handed a gun and a police car and told to go out and maintain order at 21 years old, it's like, what? Looking back, he can't believe that happened. because you're not grown up enough at 21 years old to take on the world, much less go out and make life decisions in a split second. So, people can't beat themselves up if they don't know what they want to do when they're young. And I'll let you get back to your story because this is about you, but I did all these things you were talking about was just making me think. So all the things that you were talking about were really making me think that I had hoped what people would get from this episode is not just entertainment about your podcast and things like that, but a little snippet of you that they might be able to relate to in themselves, something to give them direction or hope, or to not feel like they're weird or different or, doing something wrong in life. Because we can often feel that way if we're told one thing all the time we're growing up, that you're expected to do this, this, and this, but you want to go a different route. Well, then you feel bad about it. So I'm hoping that our listeners will learn from you that that's not the case. You can go out and try things and do things. And I don't believe that the universe makes mistakes. That I talk about spirit on this podcast. I have to believe that you were led through all those choices and decisions for a very specific reason, And
that's the thing I find with my story is a lot of it's thematic. There's a lot of redemption, a lot of heartbreak. Even I go right back to the beginning, and that's where it all started. So I mentioned before, like my friend Curtis, the only true friend that I had, and we were joined at the hip from grade 5 until when we were 5 until about probably 12 or 13. Then it seemed like overnight, and I look back at it now and I'm like, no, it wasn't overnight. But it seemed to me then that Curtis changed. He went in a different direction. He had different interests. So when I was 12, I loved all of the cartoons, your Pokemon, your Yu-Gi-Oh, Beyblade, all of that stuff. I loved my Game Boy. I loved my Nintendo. And then Curtis got into guitars and skateboards and rock music and all of this kind of stuff. And it just seemed like overnight to me at the time, like I lost my friend. He wanted to start doing different things with different people. And I tried skateboarding and I tried playing the guitar and stuff like that. And it wasn't things I was interested in. So I viewed it as I kind of got left behind. And when you really, in any point in your life, really, when you lose somebody that close to you, it strikes a chord. And to me, going through as a kid, like, I didn't know why. Like, why was I left alone? Like, was what we were doing, like, is it not fun anymore? Like, is it like, and then of course the worst part of it all was so that I wouldn't lose Curtis. It was trying to conform to what he liked, even though it's not what I liked. And it wasn't being fair to myself. And I found that incredibly challenging. And that was one mistake. Like I said, with that first trade in the military as a combat engineer, I knew I had that moment. I was like, no, this isn't you. Stop trying to be the square peg in the round hole, so to say, right? Like, find where you fit and you'll be all the better for it. So, and that's what ended up leading me to the new job. That's what led me into leaving the military and the life as a veteran, so to say. And even in the military too, like we talk about not wanting to get too familiar and broaden your horizons and do all of these things. Well, in the military, I had never actually been at a unit longer than a year and a half. Because after that, I find it takes you that first year when you learn skills and you master it and you get into the swing. Well, the problem is if I'm constantly not learning new things or doing things, I get bored. Because and of course the military runs on repetition. It's the same exercises every year. It's the same taskings every year. Nothing ever changes. You get into the same ebb and flow. And with my problem too, is you get into the hamster wheel. You eat, you work, you sleep, and it all repeats itself again. But it wasn't so much that. It's that you work and then you come home and you park your butt in front of the television and that's your night, and you go to sleep and do it again. And it's this breaking of the hamster wheel and the redemption arc that you kind of will see later on as I explore more and more things. But even Kathleen and I were talking this morning about that, and she's like, you know what, like, this is where you're at now. She said in another year or so, she said, we'll be having a different conversation because you'll have done the job and it won't be challenging anymore. It won't be new. And mind you, new things creep up all the time, but everything gets into a flow and it's the same process. And then it'll be time to go somewhere else. But which is fine for me. Like, Kathleen had even brought up the fact that, the millennial generation, everybody gives us a lot of shit, but we're nomadic. Like, we're not happy in one place. Everybody wants to find where they fit. And I look at it from my first time in the military, and it's, you know what? Like, I wasn't a good engineer and I knew it, but it was just somewhere I didn't belong. And then once I found places that I belong and a job I belonged in, I was fine. And I think that it's the pursuit of finding where you fit. And for me, the military wasn't where I fit, only because you move around. So that unit I was at in 2018, where I hit the pinnacle of my professional career, as much as I wanted to, I couldn't stay there forever. Both because I had to move, promotions, other people would have moved. Like, we couldn't have kept the same group of like 10 or 20 people together for the next 20 years. It just wasn't going to happen. As much as you would want to ask Santa Claus for something like that, but it wasn't going to happen. So everything moves, and it was tough. Like, it's even a constant reevaluation, because I look at the unit I was at after that, and I think, you know what, like, was it really so bad? Or were you just measuring it up against the best place you'd ever worked? So to me, that's really tough. But I guess if one thing can kind of come true from my story, it's find the place you fit and go after it like crazy. Because there's no point in going around and round and around and around the hamster wheel and doing the same things and not getting anywhere when, if you're not happy with something in your life, as long as it's something you can change, you do something about it. Yeah. So ever since I've left, it's been great. And like I said, I found a really good landing spot. So I think back to the times with Curtis and just being left, that it really did something to me deep down. There were a couple other events that I won't bring up in this episode, but there's a lot of things about being left behind and making what you thought was the right decision that has a lot of repercussions. I had one thing that happened when I was about 19 years old that kind of contributed to it as well. But it's that fear of being separated. And I really do think that every time I have to go somewhere, like, I do exhibit a bit of separation anxiety, and it really ties into a fear of the unknown. Especially with the military, like, you could be pulled in so many different directions, and as much training and everything as you have, sometimes you're just not ready for it. So every time I would have to go to the field, you knew it was going to be tough. Every time you'd have to go to sea, it's like, okay, well, I know I'm going to be stuck in the tin can for weeks on end. I know the people on the boat are my family. I know I thrive in routines, which is every day there, but I don't want to leave home. I don't want to go away. And I used to have a lot of like come to Jesus moments when I'd be at sea, and I'd be like, I remember sitting there, we were up north. And this was probably about 6 months before the end of my sailing time. And I remember thinking to myself, I'm like, you know what? I'm out here floating at sea. Like, I'm making the sacrifice. I'm serving my country. I'm doing all those nauseating things that you see on television. And not to knock the profession, because I love the military and it's taught me so many things and met so many amazing people. But I'm sitting there and I'm like, you know what? I'm paying for a house I'm not living in. I'm paying for a car I'm not driving. I'm sending money home. I'm doing a job here on this boat that I could do at home in a building and get to go home and sleep in my bed every night. And that's one thing I definitely want to underscore. And you coming from a military family as well with your husband, it's the sacrifice that people talk about is not easy. There's a lot of physical sacrifice in terms of time away, but nobody ever touches on the mental and emotional sacrifice that you make every time you go on that ship, every time that you go on that deployment. You are a different person when you come back from it. At sea, we got into an ebb and flow of, okay, I'm away, and when I come home, I know I'm going to be home for 2 or 3 weeks, but I don't really want to get into the swing of things because I know I'm going to be away again, and I just want to be away from people because I'm around 250 of them every day. And even when you go to bed at night, you're surrounded by another 15 people. Like, it's just, I want my space. I don't want to see anybody, and I just want to become a hermit. So it was time to break that chain as well. And I guess that's another thematic element to this whole thing of the military, and not the ooh-rah portion that you see on TV and then the commercials all the time. But every time you see people away and whatnot, it takes a toll on them. It takes a toll on their family. And for me, I even said to my chain of command, you know what, like, I'm done sacrificing. I'm done going away. I'm done sacrificing my time, my energy, and whatnot. I've given 12 years to the country, and, you know, now it's time to move on. So that's how I ended up leaving. Again, very thankful for the 12 years that I've experienced. Even doing the part-time thing I'm doing now, I'm very thankful to have an amazing crew of people, and very supportive people. And I don't think that I could have landed in a better spot than I did. So that'll wrap up the whole separation anxiety piece. But again, there was a lot of stuff coming up that contributed to it that made the military, in retrospect, a good choice at the time. But again, it wasn't where I fit.
Do you think that having the courage at 12 years to say, I'm done, I've given my part, I want out, do you think that did something to boost your sense of self-worth, your confidence, and help propel you to the next chapter? Because I know some people are scared to make a big step like that because, you know, it's scary or they're afraid of the unknown. But sometimes when we stand up for ourselves and what's right, even when it's challenging, we see an improvement in our skills from there forward. So I'm curious if you felt it brought you anything by having that courage to leave.
Oh, absolutely. It did wonders. And I found one of the toughest things going through the whole process was actually like drumming up the courage to tell your bosses, like, here's my paperwork, 6 months, see you later. That was tough. I even talked to, at the same time I was going through, a friend of mine, and I remember the day that she was getting ready to hand in her paperwork, and she was terrified. And I just told her, I said, you know what? I said, part of the whole process, or out of the whole process, that's the toughest part, is just saying, you know what? No, I'm done. I don't know what's going to come after. I don't know if I'm ready to leave or hang up the uniform, lose the identity, as some might say. But you go forward not really knowing what's next. And again, I tie that back into my generation being nomadic, trying different things, trying lots of things. And even at the end of the day, like, who knows? I mean, we're still in our 30s as elder millennials, I guess, but I don't know if we'll ever find that thing that we're looking for.
You know, I'm glad you said that, Nick. I'm sorry. You know, we just talked before we started recording that I'm quite a bit older than you are. But I have always felt I was born in the wrong time. So I don't know what group I fit in. I was born in 77. I'll just get that out there. But I feel that nomad sense of my life. I've always been interested in, trying new things, moving around. I never knew where I fit. We talked about that in the episode on your show when you interviewed me. Never knowing where I fit. So I don't know if it's just your age bracket for that, or if it's just a certain group of people that are always searching for more and new and better and different. But I'm glad that you brought that part up.
Yeah. And I think it all ties back into that whole thing about constantly reevaluating and not being happy, just stuck in that 9 to 5 for 40 years. And I can get onto that whole other topic of you're over 60. If you can do it, leave the workforce and live. That's a whole nother stream of thought that I could go way down. But at the same time, like it never hurts to constantly reevaluate. Because even in my military story, I never stayed anywhere more than a year and a half. And that was partially because the military likes to move people around from unit to unit because you're a number and a rank and usually a magnet on somebody's board. So sometimes you have to fill certain roles in order to move up through different ranks and things like that. But I believe military aside, the society is evolving to the point that we're not those generations anymore that I'm not going to sit at this desk and that's where I'm at for the next 40 years, whether I'm happy or not. As long as you can support yourself and have some standard quality of life that you're happy with, go nuts. Like, I mean, if you're happy working in the job that you're making $150,000 a year, but it's taking up your evenings and weekends, great. If you're happy out there making $30,000 and you work 6 hours a day, 4 days a week, and then you've got 3 days to do whatever and pursue your passions, I think that's amazing too. And whatever, like, quality and standard of life that you can walk through and you're happy with, like, that's so invaluable. And
you're right.
Yeah. And I'm so envious of the people that say, you know what? I don't work a day in my life because I love what I do. I don't have that luxury. I wish I did. And I think that's part of why I move around so much and why others in my generation move around so much is because we're all just trying to find that thing that we love and that place where we belong and we're accepted.
Well, I see value in that. Now, my father's generation, my dad worked his same job for 48 years and 2 weeks before retirement was fired, missed out on everything. So what they thought was a guarantee still isn't a guarantee. But from his mindset, looking at like what my husband and I do and how many different jobs we try or things we do for income, he kind of can't fathom that. And my husband was, like you're saying, he was stuck in the corporate world, working nights, weekends, answering his phone at 3 a.m, having to leave me and the kids for months at a time to go work here or there. And, that's just what we had to do. But last July, the universe kind of helped us out. And his side business of being a private investigator ended up, now it is his full-time business. And it's uncertain. It's scary. There's no steady paycheck. There's no retirement plan. We're working all that out. Every day I'm a little bit terrified. But he is a completely different person because he is doing the work he loves. And that is overshadowing the fear and the doubt and the uncertainty because every day he's doing what he loves to do. So I can completely understand where you are.
And you can't put a price on that. Like, as long as you're happy, money aside, if you've got enough to pay your bills, to save a little bit, to take a trip every once in a while, that is so valuable. It's so valuable. And to be honest with you, and I mean, I'll be completely candid about this, I have a lot of love for my organization, but they have my love and my loyalty between 7 a.m. and 3 p.m. from Monday to Friday. And outside of that, I am Nick pursuing my own passions. I don't live to work. I work to pay my bills. And that's it. Everything is a job for me because, like it or not, love it or not, and whether it's the best place in the world or the worst place in the world, we all come to the realization that you leave, you get laid off, you die, you could have been the best employee of the world or the worst employee in the world, and you will be replaced within 5 minutes. Sure, everybody will miss you, but guess what? It's the same thing as grieving. Eventually it goes away, the world keeps spinning, and it's almost like you were never there. That being said, I've got 2 pieces of advice for anybody that ever found themselves in a situation like mine. One time, and this was in 2016, I believe it was, my wife Kathleen had gotten me for my birthday, because I believe in it, a psychic reading, and it was the first one I had ever gone to. And the psychic, who is now departed, she told me a lot about, at the time, I probably used about 10 or 15 minutes of my own session picking her brain on the fact that she was declared dead once and came back to life, and all of the things that she saw. And anyway, I won't get into that this episode, but that's what led to it. And it was her, Mary Aisling was her name, back in Nova Scotia. And she, again, like John Butler gave me the, if you're not happy with something in your life, do something about it. So number 2 would lead into Mary's words to me when I asked her, am I going in the right direction? And because everything seemed so unsure and whatnot, even though I was doing very well. And she said, don't fear, because you're always where you need to be. And whether you believe in predestination or free will, it doesn't matter. Anybody like me going through it, you're always where you need to be. And with that, it goes hand in hand with another phrase that I got from my psychologist only back in the middle of 2021, when I was having an extremely rough go and trying to figure out the rest of my life. But it was a psychologist named Carolyn Anderson. And Carolyn Anderson told me, you might think you are, because of bills and responsibilities and all of these things, that you might think you are, but you are never stuck. You can always dig yourself out of the hole that you're in. Sometimes you got to tighten the belt or lace up your boots, whatever it may be. But she said it might seem like it with all of the things going on, all of these adult responsibilities, and whether it's stuff that you're doing or the hamster wheel or a job that you don't really enjoy, but you're never, ever stuck.
Sounds like you've had some important people in your life, in spite of your struggles, that have given you some obviously very good advice, and advice that you still use to this day. And I couldn't agree with Mary more. Wait, Mary, the psychic. Yes. When you say don't fear because you're always where you need to be, that's exactly what I was trying to say earlier in our talk. We find ourselves in these terrible situations, or we just can't see how we're going to move forward. And, I like to say spirit's got your back, but whatever we call it, we are where we need to be, even if it doesn't feel like it. But Nick, I'm so enjoying hearing about you and how you got where you are, but I'm not going to lie, I'm dying to hear about Ace and how he got you going with your podcast.
So if there's anybody out there that hears this that came from my channel when we did our initial interview, they already know this story. And it's basically, in its most fundamental way, it's how my podcast got off the ground. And also how another project has got off the ground as well that I'll touch on a bit later. So, the Ace story. the story of my cat. So Ace, when Kathleen and I first got together, it was probably, shortly after I joined the military. So it would have been around July of 2011. And then we moved in together when I was going through my course, basically my things, the couple things that I had, my TV and other things like that, were living at her house when I was on my course. And the next year, so it would have been into 2012, we got our first cat, Bandit. And Bandit right now in the house is the elder statesman. Bandit's still kicking. He's about to turn 14, I believe, here in March, which is an estimate because we got Bandit as a rescue and they estimated he was about 2.5. So we don't know how old Bandit is, but going by that, yeah, he's about 14 now. A couple of months after that, we had to keep Bandit entertained. And because, cats are like chips and you can't just have one, we got Ace. And now the way we got Ace is very interesting. So Kathleen and I were out running the roads and we were stopping into PetSmart to pick up some wet food and some treats for Bandit. And anyway, somebody, and I say somebody very lightly because we know who I'm talking about, somebody came running up to me and tugged at my coat and said, "Nick, I found our next cat." And so Kathleen's eyes were absolutely beaming. So we went over to the cat cages and I looked down at this little white and gray fuzzball and named Kiwi. And so Kiwi was a loving little affectionate cat. He had a little brother that was in there with him. They were part of a litter of 4. And we probably would have took the brother too, but the brother was already adopted. So Kiwi was going to be by himself. And so anyway, I don't know what clicked in my brain, but I believe it's one of those universal things of you don't decide, the universe decides for you. And out of my mouth came, "Okay, well, we'll go home, get the carrier, and we'll come back and get him." And that is how Ace came into our lives. We didn't have the supervision play area thing that you do with most animals. It's just, all right, well, if you're happy with him, we'll get him and put him in the carrier and he can come home. Well, Ace was one of the more positive parts of my life as I was going through all of the tough stuff with the military. He was one of the brighter moments. I called that cat high maintenance. I called that cat a prima donna. He was my wife's spirit animal in terms of he loved the bed and he loved to cuddle and he loved to sleep. And basically he was Kathleen's best friend. And so anyway, Ace was with us through a good amount of time. And in August of 2020, or sorry, late July of 2020, we were posted from Halifax, Nova Scotia to out west to Edmonton, Alberta, which distance traveled on the roads about 4,800 kilometers. So a good distance to go. It took us 9 days because of travel time, military regs and stuff. And anyway, when we got out here, we started noticing that Ace was getting skinnier. So anyway, we're like, okay, well, we better take him in to get him checked out. So anyway, after Christmas in 2020, that Kathleen and I had spent by ourselves because of COVID regulations, we couldn't see anybody, couldn't go near anybody. And I took the cat in on the 6th of January. And they did a blood test, and I ended up going back later, and the vet came in and said, like, hey, here's all these numbers. He did the sciencey thing and told me about lots of basically disturbing things that were found in the blood work. And anyway, so I didn't know what to make of it. And he says, I think without testing any further, it would be a safe assumption that the cat has chronic kidney disease. So anyway, I didn't know what it meant. So anyway, I said, okay. And because I've never really experienced anything in my life like that up to this point, I'm like, all right, cool. That's fine. All right. Well, we'll figure it out and we'll get him his meds and all that sort of stuff. And anyway, I remember the vet looking at me and he's like, I don't think you understand. And anyway, I said, what do you mean? Like, I don't understand. So anyway, he basically said, he's like, I always have trouble. He's like telling people this. He said, and I don't know if this is the right way for you to hear it. He goes, but it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. So anyway, I understood that, but I mean, it's still in my brain. I'm trying to process it. I'm like, well, what the hell are you talking about? Like if versus when. And I was like, I think it slowly started to dawn on me. And I was like, well, okay. So I guess because he asked me, he's like, do you have any questions? And I said, well, the only question I have, I said, is when? Like, I don't know this. I've never dealt with an animal dying, especially somebody so close to me, a part of the family. So anyway, he says, well, based on the numbers that he has, he's like, I want to do like another test. And he said, that'll kind of give us a better picture of like how his little kidneys are processing all of the bad stuff in his body. And anyway, so I had gone through with that and I was like, all right, cool. Let's figure this out. So anyway, we did the other test and it was about a week and a bit later. And anyway, he said, all right, so the cat is stage 3. He goes, so probably about 3/4. He said, sometimes when they find it, even before it's stage 1 and it's considered acute, he said, sometimes medication can fix it and reverse it because there's not enough damage. He goes, at stage 2, stage 3, there's no fixing it. It's happening. This is mortal. It's the way it's going to go. So anyway, I said, okay, like in your experience, like how much longer do I have with my cat? And he said, okay, well, he said, stage 3, it all depends. He said, I've seen it as little as a month and a half, and I've seen it up to a year and a half. So I didn't know what to think. I said, okay, so I don't think I'm going to be saying goodbye to this cat here in 2 weeks. I don't think so. Especially not with treats in the house. And anyway, so he got us on basically giving the cat subcutaneous fluid injections, which is an IV into his back just to top him up fluid-wise because his body wasn't retaining much. We put him on special dry food and wet food, and we did everything that we could for him. And I remember to this day that on the 6th of January, the day that I found out, I remember I went home, I sat on my couch and I had the cat in my hands. And I remember, and I'm not, like, for anybody that knows me, like, I'm spiritual, but I'm not religious. And I basically said, you know what? I said, if anything, I said, just give me 1 more year. Give me 1 year. Like, let's get through next Christmas and 1 year. So anyway, it was a tough year because you know what's coming. Ace loved the outside and running around. And so the time ended up coming. Kathleen and I don't usually celebrate a lot of things, especially Valentine's Day being one of them. We don't usually do it because we don't like going out. And to us, really, like it's just another day, nothing crazy. Well, the one thing we did on Valentine's Day of 2022 was we sent the little bugger over the Rainbow Bridge. So as sad as that is, Valentine's Day is kind of forever scarred now. And as it's coming up to the 1 year mark soon, it's been a little tough, and I have some cool stories about that coming up. But the one thing that Ace did, and that kind of bled in from my psychologist stuff, was the importance of having a creative outlet. So when I initially took that advice from her in December of 2021, I started writing a book. And it was nice because COVID kept everything locked down and everything home. So I got to be home with the cat for really his last 2 months. And he would curl up and I would help take him like to his food. Like he could still get around and stuff, but tried to make it easy on him getting up and down. And then, anyway, so he would sit next to me and I'd write this book that I'm working on and that I've been working on now for, well, I'll say that I've been working on for a year, but we'll get into why I haven't. And anyway, when I started doing that, and then Ace passed away, and then I sat down, geez, it would have been only a couple days after that, and I couldn't write. Like, I didn't know what was going on, what was happening. I really couldn't figure it out. And I drew a blank, and I knew that was because it's like he was kind of tied to me in that way, and that was why I started writing it. But in the middle of March, I decided, you know what, I'm not ready to start writing the book again. So I decided that I was like, you know what, I'll put the book away, and when I'm ready to start writing again, I'll start writing again. So the middle of March came and I was like, okay, so I know I need this. The left side of my brain at least needs this. So what can I do? Well, the one thing that people don't really know about the podcast, and a little bit of inspiration, cat aside, is that I was a massive fan of Supernatural, the series done by Ashley Flowers. And in that series, they tell everything, which is contradictory to everything in podcasting where they tell you, find your niche, almost don't betray your audience, do all of these things, stay in your 2 lanes, and with the subject that you've picked. Well, I looked at Supernatural as a middle finger to that logic. And I thought, you know what? I love their stuff. And it was too bad because Supernatural that March had really stopped making episodes. Nobody really knew it at the time, but they started, and Ashley especially, started getting into Crime Junkie, which is a true crime facet of Parcast. And they really started going in that direction, which there was nothing more put on Supernatural other than talking about the new podcast.
And
so
Supernatural was awesome.
It was.
Loved that show. Oh my gosh. That is what actually got me hooked on podcasts. Seriously, that was the beginning of my podcast journey, was listening to Ashley Flowers on Supernatural.
Oh yeah. And I loved how she was able to tell the stories. And mind you, she's a lot different than us. There's a whole team, and you hear it at the end of every episode, who did the research, who did the writing, who did the editing. Whereas with us, you're the one person show. Totally.
And that's why it doesn't sound like Supernatural, but hey, no. We're doing our best.
So the big thing with that is that with Supernatural ending, there was nobody to tell those stories. And the only one thing I always wished about Supernatural, for as good as they were, they hit wave tops. There was never going in depth. There was never anything too deep. And mind you, I know they had a good appreciation for time. They had ads. They had all of these things that kind of cut it down. And plus, unless you get somebody that's got a real, genuine interest in it, anything more than wave tops, and you're going to lose people.
I felt the same way. They were just enough to get your interest peaked. And they were pretty mild. Like, I could listen to them in the car with my kids. There wasn't anything too much in there. But they left you like wanting a little bit more. But Nick, I do want to just back up just a hair when you were saying Supernatural gave the middle finger to staying in your lane. I value that so much also, like you said, because my podcast kind of does the same thing. You know, 1 minute I'm going to interview somebody who knows about music and spirituality and how that helps you align with your soul. And the next I'm going to interview a medium with some super scary, crazy story. You know, I kind of go all over the place. And now I'm interviewing you. And some of my listeners might be like, what does this have to do with mediumship or spirituality? But really, it's a journey of tying things together in all kinds of weird ways. And I figure the listeners that need us will find us, right, Nick?
And that's always it. Like, my favorite listener and the people that I love hearing from, and I've seen a couple of them on YouTube because I decided to go into that realm too. Mind you, there's still no video. However, it's those comments that you see that the first line is, "Hey, I just stumbled onto your channel." And there is nothing better than that. I don't do advertising other than like pushing stuff on social media. I don't pay for anything other than the hosting site. So for somebody to find you, to stumble onto your channel and then say, "Yeah, I've listened to you for the last couple hours and I'm going to keep listening because it's amazing." That's the best kind of listener. You're super listeners. Like, they're fantastic. Mind you, sometimes they're like blips in the radar where they'll watch everything, but it's like you get that comment and then it all goes quiet. But that's fine too, because it's like, they come every so often and they're a nice little morale boost. And the big thing I know, again, that I loved with Supernatural is you would get something different every week. Something unexplained, something mysterious, aliens, paranormal. And it was all over the page. And because the Insidious agenda is more of a storytelling podcast, so it's nice to be able to touch on all of those different little things. Because I find it might be a detriment by modern podcasting logic to stay within your niche. But there's so much more out there. And I don't want to run 2 or 3 podcasts just to separate all of these amazing stories. And thank God that's what playlists are for on YouTube. So if you just want to hear paranormal or just want to hear aliens, we'll go click on the playlist and here's everything we've done up to this point.
Exactly. People can choose. If they're going through my list and like, oh, I don't care about this particular topic, fine, move on to the next one. And I think you're going to touch on this, Nick, but I think it's also important when we're talking about listeners and not advertising and doing the things that, people with lots of money do. I think you and I both feel the same way, that we didn't start this to get rich, to have a ton of followers, to put, I don't know, the words, you'll probably say it better than I will. But I know when you're talking about creative outlet and ACE helping you and figuring this type of stuff out and shutting down on COVID, like, what are we going to do during that time? The creative outlet is the point. If nobody ever listened to me talk, like, I like to tell myself, probably nobody's going to listen. I used to say that, and it took the pressure off. And if nobody ever listened to me, so what? Did I have fun doing it? Did I tell a story or teach something that might mean something to somebody? Great. Then that was it. And I think we're going to touch on that too.
Oh, absolutely. And that's part of it. Like, so I come full circle to the whole thing of, that's why having a creative outlet is so important. You might think of every day as just eat, work, watch TV, sleep, and it repeats itself like it's Groundhog Day over and over and over again. But it doesn't have to be, because like I said before, you're never stuck. Find something, find anything, even if it's just sitting there reading. Like, that's your creative outlet, because you can get into like the world of Tolkien and you can sit there. And even though there's movies and stuff now that tell you how things are, well, you've got all of this new literature that comes out and you get to picture that in your head. So that's pretty cool. And you know what? Like, you can even expand upon that. Like, read a book and then sit there and draw it out. You might not be a better, or you might not be good at drawing like me and probably 90% of the world. But at the same time, like, it adds another layer to it. And the second you take it from your head and put it onto a piece of paper, you're really 10xing the benefits of that creative outlet. So that's like this, as we read all of these amazing stories and all of people's journeys, but there's really no way to get it out of your ears once it goes in. And the podcast is just a way to get it out of your head and into like a creative venue. And there's certain benefits to that. Like, the one thing that I find is really cool is that even if I stop today at these 29 plus episodes that I've done now, 100 years from now, the internet's still going to be here and my voice is going to survive even after I'm nothing more than dirt or ashes, depending on how we go with things. But the biggest thing that I can impress is, for me, in addition to the creative outlet, it was the importance of breaking that hamster wheel. The importance for me of stopping to sleepwalk through life, stopping to realize that work is a means to an end. It is not life. It is not meant to be life. It is just a part of you for 37 and a half hours a week. And the importance of finding something that aligns with your interests and who you are. So for me, I'm introverted. I like my circle of friends and people being small. I love my home and I love to be in it. So if I can sit in front of my computer and read and watch things and look at books and create an episode and then tell the world about it, that's my extroversion to the world. And that's how I get myself out there, even though I might not always engage with a lot of people outside of work. That it's important to at least stay engaged with those sorts of things, because in the end, it's only going to do wonders for you. And above all, it's how you maintain control, or at least me personally, of how I maintain control of my mental health. Because it's a constant battle between anxiety and depression, catastrophization, and any other niche little subject you can fit into. I've always thought of myself as being my own worst enemy. And when these things tend to take over, I become a prisoner in my own mind. And my jailer, as I learned from my psychiatrist, is catastrophization, making the absolute worst case scenario out of something, or a mountain out of an anthill, or a molehill, however you want to put it. So the podcast and the creative outlet is an amazing way to deal with mental health issues. Mind you, it goes hand in hand with eating well and exercising. That it's so important to have this too, because as I find, we focus a lot on having a healthy body, but not always everybody touches on having a healthy mind as well. So it's important to read, and not, even if you don't read, audiobooks are great. You still get to picture things. But in terms of having that creative outlet, engaging the left side of your brain, which completely gets forgotten about by work tasks and the majority of what we do, that it's important to engage that other half. So that way, if the right side of your brain is becoming the jailer, then the left side of your brain becomes that friend, with no job and no kids that just wants to party and hang out all the time. And that's the guy you have fun with. So it's so important to engage that left side too. And that will, of course, segue into my next point, in which a couple of times throughout my podcast, and I know up in Canada, we just had it on Wednesday, was Bell Let's Talk Day. But it's the importance of attacking the stigma of mental health that some people still believe exists out there. Mind you, we're never going to get rid of, all of these mental health disorders. We're never going to get rid of suicide. We're never going to get rid of all of these bad things that come along with, again, being a prisoner in your own mind. However, it's these types of things that will help. And I can't recommend enough engaging the mental health resources that you have available to you, because sometimes it takes an objective third party, somebody that's not family and not friends, to look at you and go, okay, maybe this is the piece you're missing, or to help you find it, because we know psychologists don't solve your problems. They just give you enough tools and point you in the right direction And eventually you figure it out or you find your way back, one of the two. And over the 12 plus years I've now been in the adult world, I can't tell you how many times I've been in and out of mental health, struggling with lots of different things, but it never stopped me coming back. So I always like to throw in a couple of posts every now and again to attack the mental health stigmas and the belief that people think bad of you if you go and engage mental health. We don't live in that world anymore. And I will say that if you feel like you do, you need to find somewhere else to go. Because I can't say enough how important, like, proper, good care of your mental health really is. Be around people that are supportive, do things that you love to do, eat good, exercise, and find something to get those cool, amazing thoughts out of your head. Again, even if it's sitting in a chair reading a book, drawing a picture, or even if you're like me and on the car on the way to work on a Friday, you're there belting out "My Heart Will Go On" by Celine Dion at the top of your lungs.
I'm with you on that one. I'm a big singer in the car, definitely. And when I am depressed or riddled with anxiety, my song choices might be strange, but they work for me. And Nick, I'm really appreciative that you did bring up mental health, because I've touched on it a couple times with mediumship, in that there's a fine line sometimes when you know, people can say, oh, if you hear from spirit, you're crazy. You need to talk to somebody. But because I know there is a fine line there of, what voices are you hearing? What are they saying? Things like that. So I'm not making light of what you're talking about. I'm just tying it in that in the world that I function in, mental health comes up in a few ways and in a negative light. And then I also struggle with, I'm actually interviewing somebody soon who's a psychotherapist, because I mentioned this before to you. I run into people who think they need help with the paranormal when really what they need is mental help. And it's awkward. You don't know how to say that to somebody. That's where I'm learning is, if a client contacts me asking for help and I can clearly tell it's not the help that I can offer, how do you gently and positively offer somebody proper mental health? So there's a lot of areas, but beyond that, I too have suffered from anxiety my entire life. And I think that I've been told a lot, I can't finish things, or I won't finish things, or I'm not good at this or not good at that. And it became what I always knew about myself. It became who I was. And when you talked about leaving the military and I asked you about that courage that it took, for me, I thought of that again when you're talking about starting your podcast, because it took a lot of courage for me to start the podcast. Like, I was terrified. I thought like you're talking about catastrophizing. I can't even say that word. Sorry. But I thought of all the worst, the bad things. Nobody's going to listen. I'm going to sound terrible. What if they do listen and they don't like me? You can say all these horrible things. But for me, I have learned doing the scary things in life is helping my mental health. Leaving a job, leaving a bad marriage, starting something new and scary is actually reteaching my brain, I am worthy. I am good at things. I don't have to be a perfectionist. I think we talked last time that I had been invited or asked to go to a kind of a paranormal investigation. A woman was worried that there was something wrong in her house. And it was very clear to me at that time, and my husband was there as well, that there was nothing paranormal going on. It was certainly something mental health related. But, so that's separate of the people that we love and we know, but we are going to be in this paranormal world that you and I circle in, run into people who, I don't know what I'm trying to say, who we're not close to, that are strangers to us, but definitely need help. And those are the ones I struggle with knowing what to say. How do you tell someone who's clearly not well in their head that you can't help them, but they need other kind of help? So separate of what we're talking about with friends and family.
And to be honest with you, I think those are probably, at least from my perspective, those are the easier people to tell. And those are the people that I think will honestly receive the message a lot better. Because you talk to friends, you talk to family. The only issue is those people know you. They know often what you need to hear, and they're already in your corner. Those people are subjective. Again, you have a history. They know your life. They know your tendencies. They know your personality. With that being said, sometimes and let me backtrack. There is no substitute for professional mental and medical health help. There is no substitution. There's no friend. There's no family member that can be a substitute for somebody that is trained and does this for a living. So the people that need to hear it the most, sometimes it takes that person at work or that person that you don't know that you might just talk to off the cuff that says, I don't really think you're doing that well. Like, is everything okay? And then you open up and talk, and it's like, all right, well, you need to stop discussing this with your friend of 30, 40 years. You need to find somebody that has a couple of letters after their name, and you need good, honest, and old-fashioned professional help, because those are the people that know. Like your friend coming saying, oh, let's go have a beer and let's chat. That doesn't solve anything. It might be a Band-Aid solution, but guess what? When you get up the next morning and you put your pants on, you're no better off than you were before. So I do think the people that you don't know are the ones that you can probably influence the most.
That's a great point, Nick. Thank you. Always fun to talk to new people and get new perspectives on things, for sure, because not any one of us is going to have the answer to every situation. And we learn from each other. I mean, that's my hope, is every single person I encounter in my daily life that I can learn something from them. Whether it's something I want to try or do or be like, or the opposite, something I don't want to be like, but it's important. So I appreciate your perspectives, but I'm curious to move on a little and hear your where you're headed with the podcast, and also some of your favorite paranormal stories, kind of like where you fit in that world, like what else you're doing.
No, absolutely. And that's one of course, my favorite subjects. Is I like to say talk about myself, but I don't. But of course, I'd be amiss to come on the show without actually talking about what I do. So before I do that, I just want to share the cool story that we talked about before we hit the record button. And it comes full circle to the start of the mental health thing and how the podcast got started. And of course, I come right back to the cat. And so one of the things I've noticed is that over the last couple weeks, I've been seeing the cat more and more. And for those who might have just missed that part of the episode, I'm talking about Ace, my dearly departed friend. And so I started to see him more and more. And the other night when my wife and I had a very emotional conversation, I walked down the hall to the room to give my other two cats treats. And I looked into the other room and I noticed the little white body and the little gray butt walk by, and he just passed one of the walls out of sight of me. And I remember I walked right in the room, and of course he wasn't there. And I remembered saying to him at that moment, I said, I know it was just an emotional time. I said, but not right now. We were just coming out of stuff and we were starting to make dinner. And then I was like, oh, great. That's all I need now is to have the cat come in to pay a visit. And I don't get to give him not the respect, but I don't get to give him the attention that I wanted to in that moment. So I told him, I said, you know what? I'll be sleeping later. Come see me then. And anyway, so I've been seeing the cat a little bit more. and more over the last couple weeks. And there's two reasons or two theories I have for that. So one, a little over 2 weeks from today, the 29th of January, as we record the episode, the anniversary of Ace's passing is coming up. February 14th, Valentine's Day for normal people, the first annual Cat Memorial Day for my wife and I. Now, the more curious reason is that with the cat's last month and a bit on this physical plane is when I started writing my book. And if you remember, I stopped writing after the cat passed because I had a writer's block. So I finally sat down and started game planning all of these little things and reevaluating the first 45 pages that I've already written. And I have finally started putting, I'd love to say pen to paper, but I'm started to put fingers to keyboards. And that's when I've started seeing the cat. And sometimes it's out of the corner of my eye, or sometimes stuff starts not moving, but you see something move. Or the other night, after I'm sure all of the emotional energy swirled around our house as we were hashing some things out, the cat came to pay a visit. And whether it was as the great mediator or whether it was just a calming presence or something just to reassure that he's there, he's been around. So I definitely tie the book and the cat together. And even at the start of everything, I even went back. I created a title page, even though I don't have a title yet. And the very second page was the dedication, and it just says to Ace. And that, I think, is why I've started seeing the cat again. And
you're going to make me cry, Nick. You're totally going to make me cry and ruin my makeup for today. Oh, my God. Oh, my God. Well, doing what I do, of course, Ace is there for all of those reasons. One, the heightened energy in the house. He loves you both. He had to come and be the great mediator. He had to break the spell, as we say in our house when it's chaos. Something has to break that spell. And he's motivating you. He's like, hey, you started this when I was there. It's time to pick it back up and work on it. No doubt. Oh my gosh. I almost wish I didn't know the Ace story so I could have done a reading for you.
Well, if he's there, just let me know. I know it was interesting, and I've lost animals before. Mainly they were fish and hamsters, but I mean, the hamsters, everybody's hamster when it dies is usually of its own doing. Either it got scared, or in our case, it got out of its cage and chewed a hole in the wall and disappeared, and then reappeared 2 weeks later and died out of God knows what reason. But anyway, that's hamsters to a T. So I mean, it's just one thing that was interesting, like from his passing, was all of like the pet grief and things like that, because I'd never lost somebody that I had an emotional, like a high at that time emotional bond with. I had some family members and whatnot have passed away. I've had some family members that are also no longer in my life. But it's one of those things that I have found in each of those situations, it was easier to let go. And whether it was because those people played a big part in my childhood and were a part of my life, but I hadn't seen them on a daily basis like I had seen the cat. And especially, like I said, Ace was there with me through some of the harder moments and the beginning of my life in adulting.
That's it. Ace was there at critical recent times for you. You had a bond with him and you got comfort from his presence. It's a very, very different feeling. And animals love us so unconditionally that we don't have any of that baggage we sometimes have with people that we love.
Yeah. And that, I think, is one of the things that ties him here. And I talked to, just on YouTube anyway, I had reached out to a lady who does a lot of psychic stuff, but more for, again, the animal side of things. And anyway, she said in one of the messages she wrote back to me, she said, you know what, don't worry if after the cat passes that you don't see him or you don't feel him for a while. She said, because it takes them a while to learn how to be spirit guides and how to learn how to come back and forth and things like that. So she said, don't stop like giving out your energy and don't stop speaking to the cat. She said, but it takes them time to learn and come back. So the day that the cat passed, I mentioned in the interview that we did, I saw his little butt cross the threshold, and then I don't recall ever seeing him again until I started writing. So one of those things is just, I'm starting to put that back out into the world again. So poof, here's the cat.
I'm going to add to what she told you. Sometimes we're not ready for what they have to say, and we're not ready to be aware of spirit. And Ace very well may have been waiting for the perfect time to come back when you would be open to the opportunity to start writing again.
I think so too, as subliminally as it might be. I think that's the exact reason. Because I can't tell you how many times over the last year, like, you call out and I clean off his little urn that sits on our table upstairs. I clean that off a couple times a week, and you tell it as you almost like rubbing the lamp with the genie in it. Like, hey man, you want to come like see me in a dream, or you want to come hang out when I'm eating lunch or working out in the morning? Like, go for it. But yeah, I do think that it's one of those, even if you're ready, I think they know better and that you might not be. So I think it's also one of those things is like, I still think of the cat, and I mean, you still get a little bit shaken up emotionally, but now it's at the point when you think of the cat and the first thing that comes to the first real thing that comes into your body is a smile rather than sadness. So.
Well, that's good, because it takes a while, I think, for some people to get to that point where thinking of the pet without the sadness and seeing the smile is what actually happens. It takes a long time. And I think I mentioned before we hit record that I think I was visited by our cat in spirit last night. Hopefully it was her. But when I see her now in my mind's eye, or I think she's around, I do smile. I can see her little smiley face as she's meowing at me from the bathroom counter, instead of the heart-wrenching feelings I had when she first escaped our house and we searched for her and couldn't find her, and eventually assumed that she had passed. So I'm glad you can now see Ace and think of him in a better light, knowing that he's here guiding you. He's no longer in pain or suffering. He's here just to be your guide and love you from the other side.
And that was one of the things too. I really think that made it a lot, not easier with his passing, because I don't think that's the right word, but is to have this belief in the other side. Because there are some people that are non-religious, and some people that believe, you know what, we're no more than the body that we live in, and when we're gone, we're gone. Things cease. But it's to have that belief in the other side, and that people and pets and things that are gone can go and come back as they so choose, and that you can still communicate with the other side. That I think that, at least not easier, but I find it, at least that's been a little bit more comforting, to say the least.
I think that's huge, because for the people who do believe that when we die, we just die, I can't see a life believing that. There's no comfort there. There's no hope. There's nothing to look forward to. It's just, I'm glad I have not ever experienced that. The comfort in knowing that our loved ones, pets, people, whatever, are still around us all the time is just, there's no words for that. You know how I feel about that.
Oh, absolutely. For sure. And now that we, of course, dig out of the little rut that we were, not the rut, but as we dig out of the lower end of the spectrum of emotion that we were in, now I'll definitely touch on the podcast itself. So again, we've already discussed a bit about supernatural going defunct and disappearing and those stories not getting told. And that's kind of where I wanted to fill this in. So with me being the introverted person that I am, like most people, I know some people are closet introverts, but that's okay. I wanted to find that creative outlet, which I did. And that's the podcast. And it's also been nice because I started something and I've followed through with it and it keeps going and it's exciting and all of these things. I can't tell you how enriching it's been to know all of these stories and to be able to read about them in great detail. A lot of them I know already, but we never actually got into the weeds. And I think that it's so important that all of them are told. And that because all of them, there's a certain credence to each one of them that's amazing. And I use not the acronym, but I use this saying that each of the stories in their own right are terrifyingly beautiful because they're all scary. There is no comforting subject matter in any single one of them. And they are so terrifying that the pictures that you can come up with in your head as you're listening to it is a truly beautiful thing. With that being said, I know they're not all exciting. I know they're not all edge of your seat. Patrick Wilson and Vera Farmiga aren't fighting demons in any of these stories. Tom Cruise is not shooting down aliens. These are the things that real people have gone through. And that's what makes them amazing. Whether you believe it or not is for you to decide. However, the one thing I always think is that I wasn't there. I don't know much about what came after. There's a lot of things that people could do. Like if you look at the story of the Perrons, if you look at the story of the Lutzes, so The Conjuring, Amityville, things like that, there are reasons to believe that these people might have actually used or created these stories and that they're for profit. But the one thing I always think is that I wasn't there. And as now an aspiring author of fantasy, it's amazing to see what people can drum up. But the one thing that always chills my blood is, what if it was real? Or what if it is real? There's no way that we'll know for certain. We can only take things at a glance, and that's all we ever get. We weren't going through the 10 years of the Perron family living in Round Top Road with them. We know by modern paranormal investigation and things that there are things that happen in that house. And I'm sorry I pick on the Conjuring story, but everybody knows it. It's out there now, and it's huge. And like I said in the episode, what they show you in the Conjuring movie is scary, but it does not hold a candle to the real thing. And that's where I come full circle. And that's why these stories need to be told. Because we get a snapshot, we do not get everything. And it's the stories from the real people that need to come out. So some of them that I like to highlight, and I mean, I've just been going through my episode catalog. I love every one of them in their own way. They're all special. They all offer something, even if you look at things that aren't well known. So let's look at, I did chapter 4, which was the haunting of the Borley Rectory in the UK. Now, there are certain things that make that story great. So you've got generations of people that have lived in this house that have experienced supernatural things that aren't, well, mind you, 2 of the sets of people were related, but the majority weren't, but yet they've all still experienced these things. What's been found ties into things hundreds of years before this place was even built. But you don't know that. And if you don't dig into the story, you don't find out that there was a nun and a monk that she loved, and the place that they call the Nun's Walk is because the nuns used to go between the rectory and where the monks were. And you wouldn't know that their love was forbidden. And you wouldn't know that horrible things happened to them that led to that nun being seen on the property 500 plus years later. You don't get things like that. And you also don't know that for the last 20, 25 years of them being together, that the Warrens went to that site every year. Something drew Ed and Lorraine back. So it's all of these stories that are amazing, terrifyingly beautiful in their own way. My personal favorite, and I don't shortchange this whatsoever. It's in my host bio. It's in the very first part of the episode, and are some of the first words that I've ever spoken on my podcast was in chapter 1. I covered the story of the exorcism of Annalisa Michel. It is one of my favorite paranormal stories, and it is the true story that inspired the exorcism of Emily Rose, which for me personally, due to Jennifer Carpenter being so convincing, it is the only movie that I have ever found genuinely terrifying. No matter how many times I watch it, including every single Halloween night, it terrifies me. So to learn the true story of Annalisa Michel and what she went through and things that eventually led to her death are amazing. Now, the bit about that story too that's really fascinating is that you've got a medical aspect to it, where the medical community did everything they could for so many years, but the one thing that the medical community couldn't do was drive out the devil. The priests that tried to help her and the religious salvation, it took Annalisa being visited by what she perceived as the Virgin Mary to know her true purpose. Now, it draws in so many different things. Like it'll make you think about religion and the way that people really buy into religion. The belief, could medicine have saved Annalisa? In the end, it was determined that she suffered dehydration and malnourishment, and physical things killed her. But the one thing that we don't discount, or the one thing that we discount far too often, is the possibility that, you know what happens if the demons and whatnot that were inside her really got to Annalisa? And I come back at this again when I covered the story of Arn Cheyenne Johnson, or the famous case that people talk about, the devil made me do it. When Arn and his defense attorney went into their first day in the courtroom, they mounted the defense of not guilty by way of demonic possession. And in that, I mention the judge's comments of how he basically threw out the defense. There is no such defense, as his exact words verbatim. But why can't we quantify it? Why can't we believe it? What I think to myself is, and I'm not a legal professional, I'll definitely throw that out there, but why can't Arn Johnson defend himself because of what he went through? What if Arn Johnson was possessed? I know there's not a way to quantify it other than what you would hear from religious experts or the Warrens or things. And the Warrens were actually what got him onto that train of thought, which is a whole nother beast altogether. But he couldn't defend himself based on what he went through. Like, they had to mount a defense by almost, you got in a fight, you murdered somebody, and off we go.
You know, Nick, I can't wait to listen to that episode. Okay. Because I'm not super familiar with it. I've heard it, but I want to re-listen. But what you're making me think of in our interview, that house I lived in, and all along me thinking it was one thing when the other medium, Brittany, thought it was a completely different thing. Now imagine Jan got blamed for what he did. Jan did what he did. We talked about if my family had gone down a similar road, but it wouldn't have been our fault, is the way, like what I'm hearing you say, like looking back, thinking whatever came out of that, we weren't doing that. We weren't causing that. And no one was there with us to suffer through it with us. people could look at me and think I'm nuts, or I made it up, or it was, coincidences that I tied together because we were stressed out. Sure, whatever. But you are 100% right. Until somebody is actually in it, experiencing that day in and day out discomfort, fear, trauma, like, who are you to tell them it didn't happen or that it didn't drive them to do something that they normally would not have done?
Oh, for sure. And I find that's the underlying thing with a lot of the paranormal and the supernatural stories that I tell and things of that nature, even when I get into the cryptids and the urban legends and things like that, is the underlying question, is it possible? You might not believe it. It might not be entirely in your train of thinking. Your religion might conflict with it and you'd be like, you know what? It's not what I believe, so it doesn't happen. The only one thing I want people to think, and I know my father listens to the podcast and he doesn't really believe in a lot of these things, but the one thing I believe people should think as you work through it, and whether it's true, in which case it could be embellished, or whether you think it's entirely made up, like, is it possible? Did these people go through these things? Because we can't discount it. We didn't go through it. We don't know. And especially some of the older stories, like the Bell Witch of Tennessee that I covered in the beginning, we weren't there. We don't know what John Bell and his family went through. There's not enough historical evidence to say one way or another. But the one thing to ask is always, is this possible? And that's one train of thought. So like I said, we have the paranormal, the supernatural, the cryptids, the urban legends, the folklore. There are so many different things that you can kind of pick and choose and go, okay, yeah, you know what? Like, I see a little bit of Annalise and Michelle. Yeah, that could have been true. The boogeyman, who knows? That might be an entirely different train of thinking. Even to get into some of the more neat cryptid stories that I've told, like that of the Wendigo, I really wanted to do a lot with that. Like, I wanted to have somebody from the Cree or the Ojibwe or some indigenous person to come in and bring a little bit more life into that story, not out of racial appropriation, but because somebody from that culture could tell it way better than I could. And because stories like that have survived for so long, there has to be some level of credence given to it. It's the same thing as when we look at, like, the Loch Ness Monster. Like, yeah, sure, it could have been entirely purported. It could be a hoax. But does the possibility exist that out there somewhere in the depths of the ocean or the tops of the mountains that we have never explored, could it be possible that these things exist? Absolutely. But then we come into other things, like other parts of the podcast. So, like, I'll bleed into true crime. And then I'll bleed into, things that have actually happened, like disappearances and things like that. Those are the ones that I find people believe in. And you find a lot of true crime people out there that will believe it's entirely possible that, oh, you know what? Somebody did go on a murderous rampage and kill all of these people. Or like Villisca, when a killer waited inside the attic of the house for a family to go to sleep and then murdered all of them and their 2 guests. We'll believe that. But somebody says, oh, you know what? That person was demonically possessed and suffered and then died because of it. We can't comprehend it because we can't see it. So I find the true crime stories, putting those in the podcast, are a little bit of a way to grab the people that say, you know what, I don't believe in the paranormal. I don't believe there's life after death. I don't believe there's this eternal battle between everybody's version of God and the devil. So it's a way to draw them in. And I don't ask that they believe. I just ask that they question it. What if? So the true crime stories, putting those in with it, are a way to draw people in. The same thing as the UFOs and extraterrestrials. Those are things, for some reason, people don't believe in God and the devil and demons, but they believe in UFOs. And mind you, there's more tangible proof, like the fact we're a pale blue dot in an infinite universe. So there's no way we're the only ones here. But again, it's throwing those things in to grab people and to bring them in. And I cover some pretty amazing stories. So like, I love true crime. I might not be one of those like people that comes home on a Friday night and is like, yeah, I'm not up to much tonight, but binges 10 episodes of Dahmer. Like, I might not be one of those people, but I find there's so much or so many amazing things in these stories that they need to be told. I might not go into like the investigative details or anything that's really, really deep, or start, drawing lines on a board between one thing and another thing. But it's giving the overview of that story. And I want to give you enough to make you interested. And then if you want to do that and draw all those lines and get into the weeds with it, you can take it that much farther. And you can do those things and you can look into them further, which is great. I found that was awesome about Supernatural. Supernatural would give you the wave tops, but it's like, okay, well, that's not enough for me. So that you actually have to go in and look at things to get the whole bit of the story. But at the same time, then we get into the whole finding 5 or 6 different things that are about the same thing, but 3 say one thing, 2 say another, and then one's completely out in left field. So where's the truth? But yeah, I enjoy telling all of these stories because they're amazing in their own way. And some of them people know, but they don't know that it's that story. So if we take the one I did to close out 2022, and I told the story of the disappearance of Tom and Eileen Lonergan and what may or may not have been evisceration by sharks or dehydration and drowning, we'll never know. But a lot of people know, oh, hey, I've seen the movie Open Water, and that movie sounds a lot like this story. Well, yeah, it does, because it's the story that inspired it. So sometimes a lot of these you'll know, but you'll not have actually, you'll know these stories, but you'll not have actually thought like, oh, it's based on a true story, which I can go down a whole nother rabbit hole of when those words flash up at the beginning of a movie, but I'll save that for another time. But if I can recommend to anybody a few to check out. So chapter 1 was the one that started it all, and that was the exorcism of Annalise and Michelle. That was in no way, shape, or form my best product. I thought it was amazing and groundbreaking at the time. But now in retrospect, I go back and I listen to it, and you kind of cringe a little bit because it's like, okay, it's not the best quality of editing. The script was amazing. I'll give myself that. I loved that script. And it was my favorite story, and I risked a copyright infringement just to put some stuff in there that I needed to put in there. And it was a really great starting point. So it's cool to point back at it and go, that's my favorite story. That's where I started, and look how far I've come. And then as we progress, like we get stories like the Great Amherst Mystery and Esther Cox. Like the first time I actually had somebody on the podcast who did a voiceover, my friend Cassie. And that's a story from home. So that's when I wanted to get out there. Everybody knows it, but we don't get too deep into the context. And then we did the Villisca Axe murders. And then I had my first breakthrough in chapter 8 when I did, and this was where I took the foray into UFOs and extraterrestrials. I did the Roswell incident, and I brought in Area 51 and the gray aliens. And that's the first episode that actually took off for me. And I was surprised. I never thought that a podcast with podcast art that literally says a paranormal podcast put something out about aliens, and that people bought into it. Hook, line, and sinker bought into it. And it's amazing. It's still one of my most popular, and I did it way back when. I'm just looking through the left-hand column here now, and I released that on the 23rd of August. So it's been out for over 7 months and still one of the most popular that's out there. And then I released things like, the Fox Sisters, the first believed mediums. Mind you, it was a hoax, and it wasn't entirely real. However...
that one got me, Nick. I was like, ooh, I got to talk to him about this one.
Yeah. And but their story was amazing. Like how they led into seances and how they did what they did, and the rise of spiritualism, although not exciting of a script to talk about and read, but of the implications for so many years later.
It paved the way for people like me.
Absolutely.
You know, and I think if that was their biggest contribution, then thank God for them. But yeah.
And the one thing that was interesting about Maggie and Kate Fox was the parallels that we can draw to like modern young celebrities of today. So we saw in many years past people like Justin Bieber and Miley Cyrus find that young fame, get bought into it, and then they go completely off the rails. Well, that's what happened to Maggie and Kate. I mean, they both became alcoholics, and it destroyed their lives. It destroyed their families. Kate went on to have kids, and the kids got taken away from her. Maggie caused rifts in the spiritualist community and was cast out. Kate was supposed to follow her, and Kate ultimately didn't stand up for her sister and kept doing the mediumship thing that she was always doing. And together they both lost their older sister, and none of them talked to each other again. So to see little parallels and nuances in that story, like I said, although it wasn't exciting for me to research, it was everything else that was around it that was kind of like, you know what, you can see all these parallels even hundreds of years ago that still echo today. And then I try to throw in, you know, some educational things, like when I talked about Lucifer and the hierarchy of hell. Although not exciting to most people, it was more educational. Same as when I touched on Aleister Crowley. Like, it not fascinating, like there's no demons, nobody got murdered, but these people were so important in the communities that they were in. And then of course the big stories, the Amityville Horror, the Salem witch trials. That was an episode I had a lot of fun with as well, was the entirety of witch trials. And that was my first two-parter, to actually do Europe and the modern ones, and then to move in specifically just to Salem. But like most surprises in the podcast community, I was like, okay, Europe's going to be kind of pedestrian. It's going to be, well, I guess the modern term is, it's going to be a mid episode. And then I'm going to drop Salem as a part 2, and Salem's going to blow the roof off this place. And Salem was about as maniacal as a box of kittens. And I was not expecting it, because I was like, oh, you know what? Like, people might not know a lot about the early stuff, but everybody has heard the name Salem. Like, everybody knows, whether it's because you have a fascination with the witch trials, or you're like, oh my God, hey, that was Sabrina's cat. Like, no matter what it is, like, everybody's heard of Salem. But so like I said, I wasn't expecting Roswell to be big, and Roswell blew up. I expected Salem to be the next big Roswell for me, and it was quiet. And I didn't understand why. And I did a lot of work around Halloween. Like, I released an episode and then a bonus episode pretty well every week leading up to it. And the witch trials were 2 episodes. So it was 3 episodes that week, and I put so much effort into it. And then the week of Halloween was huge, because for the Tuesday episode, I released The Conjuring. It was my first episode that broke an hour. And The Conjuring was quiet, and I didn't expect it. Like, I don't know how the algorithms work, and I don't know how it picks up what it does, but I figured, you know what, like, if I even put on my promotional art, that yellow The Conjuring logo, that it would have drew a lot of people in, and it hasn't. But that being said, the joys of having that entire episode catalog still up and on is that people who have found the podcast seem to take a liking to that episode. Because if I look at the ones before, from back in October, just on Buzzsprout alone, 58, 55 downloads, and now randomly The Conjuring is at 89. Like, I don't know why it does what it does, but again, it's that beautiful thing of, we cover all of these stories, and then people can pick and choose. And even the ones that are more well-known, like, so I try to even throw in, when I did my bonus Halloween episode about the exorcism of Roland Doe, and I literally put in the title, The Exorcist, because that's the story that inspired William Peter Blatty to do that book. And then, of course, Friedkin's movie later on. And then, of course, there's the stories of all of the cryptids that people seem to love. I'm not a big cryptid guy. Like, the boogeyman and Yetis and all of these things. Like, they're cool, they're amazing. I don't think personally, I'm like, you know what? Like, is that real? Like, I don't know. I like to believe it is. Like, it's pretty cool to think like we live in a world like The Witcher, but at the same time, like, that does terrify me as well. And I do think about the stories. I'm like, you know what? If somebody way, way back when came up with that in their head, that's pretty cool. But at the same time, if somebody also experienced it, then that's terrifying. And the one thing I always think with those, like urban legends and folklore, is that the stories had to come from somewhere. Whether they were made up or not, they had to come from somewhere. And I could get into a whole parallel of cryptid stories and urban legends and basically being the same thing as like the Bible and all of our religious texts. But again, that's a case study for a whole nother time. But then even do you want to cut in?
I was just going to say, I've gotten some flack from my family for using bad words in my podcast, which I rarely do. I think I've said 3 bad words in all my episodes. But the way I look at this, what you're talking about with our different episodes and going our different directions, my dad has always said to me, there's an ass for every seat. There really truly is something for everyone. And why limit what we're offering when we could appeal to a wider range of people? Again, not everybody has to like what we have, but maybe they can find 1 or 2 that they like. You know, that's where I am with that.
Oh, no, for sure. And I totally get that. And I even wanted to even foray out of the world of the make-believe, I guess, as some might say, and go into more real things. Like, so I went through a swing where I covered a serial killer and then an alien abduction and then Count Dracula. And then miraculously, and again, I don't know how the internet god works the way that it does, but on the 29th of November, I dropped an episode, and that is my favorite episode for anybody that cross-listens to this. And I mentioned it in my special New Year's episode, but there is nothing that's held a candle to the Dyatlov Pass incident that I covered in chapter 21. I don't know why. To me, there are more amazing stories.
You did the best job. Let me just cut in there because Thanks. I have heard that story from Josh Gates. I have heard that story from Ashley Flowers. My kids love that story. And then I listened to yours, and then on the way to pick up the kids, and then I was like, oh my God, kids, you've got to listen to how Nick did this one. And they were enthralled. Seriously, they really, really loved how you did it. I mean, you did the voices, you told it in such a different way. You added details that no one else had ever told us before, or that we hadn't found. Like, oh my God, I'm not one bit shocked that that episode did well for you, because that was a fantastic episode.
Oh, and again, it still surprises me why it was as good as it was. And I dropped it on, and up to that point, Roswell had the crown. Roswell had, within, well, probably since the month or month and a half between the 2 episodes, Roswell had around 400 views on YouTube, which my average videos would usually get between 10 and 20 at that time. So for an episode like Roswell to have 400 was huge. I was like, okay, that's my first, for lack of a better term, viral episode for me. And then came the Dyatlov Pass incident that smoked 400 downloads in less than a day and a half. And I don't know why. I don't know if it's the algorithm. I didn't market it differently than the other ones. I used it once I realized it was successful. I did another couple minor social media pieces out of it and tried to even do like a memorial thing for those that had died. But Dyatlov is neat, and I find in retrospect it was a different story because you've got, again, something for everyone. What happened to these 11, 20-something-year-old hikers in the wilderness? Was it a Yeti? Was it the local indigenous people? Was it some CIA, KGB conspiracy? Was it a military missile testing site? Was it aliens? Or did they all just eat something and go crazy? Who really knows? But I think that's the neat thing about Dyatlov was it's got something for everyone.
It totally does. Nick, I'm sorry. I don't know if you saw my note. My family just came home.
Okay.
And they're going to not be quiet.
Oh, that's fine. Yeah, no,
so
that's totally
I don't
cool.
want to cut you short, but I think I'm going to mark this clip right here so I know to take this out.
No worries.
But if you want to go from finishing up with Dyatlov and then just wrap up a little bit and tell people like how to find you, I can ask you that and all of that. But I want you to get to say your last thing, you know?
Oh yeah, no, okay. No worries.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and mute me.
So yeah, then moving on from Dyatlov, we've got a couple of other amazing stories that I'll leave people to discover for themselves. But what I will say is, even if you don't think you're going to be a fan of a certain story or two, don't discount them, because they're all amazing in their own right. And especially with, I just did one of my favorite cases. I don't know when this is going to air, but part 1 of my foray into Jack the Ripper has come out. I had a blast doing part 1 because it was all of the events. And then as a part 2 that's going to drop this Tuesday, the 31st of January, I actually got to look more into the suspects and the police and what might have happened to Jack the Ripper. And it was a good opportunity to separate the two, and just move away from telling it all in one episode so that people could digest it, because there's a lot of important things to know about the case that I didn't want to rush through, especially from having gone to the UK over 10 years ago and having done a walk with one of the world's leading Jack the Ripper experts, Donald Rumbelow, and standing where people were murdered and you can just feel it around, like the people that would have been there and the police and the confusion and all of that. And it came through in how he was telling his stories when we did the walk. And I thought it was absolutely fantastic. But I guess with the podcast, really, there's a lot to discover and there's a lot coming. I made a promise with myself to interview at least one person a month for this year. It's a little tough for me trying to track tons of people down because they don't grow on trees. And I believe that the people that I find to be guests on the show is the universe colliding. And I don't want to go out and find people that it's just, I could plug you into that spot and play it. I want to find nice, genuine things and have there truly be a reason for all of the guests that come on that I've kind of found by way of the universe doing its thing. So I think with the guest thing there, if I don't achieve the goal of getting one guest a month, I'm not heartbroken. It just means it wasn't meant to be. So what's next for the podcast? Well, I'm going to be trying to branch out a little bit more into social media in order to try and market this. I'm going for pure organic growth. I don't want to spend a dime on marketing, mainly because I have 100 million other things going on and, trying to save to retire some point in the future and all of these things that, again, the people that are meant to find the podcast will find it. The podcast is still not perfect, but I'm learning as I go. And each episode I try to do a little bit better than the other one, try to do a little bit better job with editing. I try to do a little bit better job with some of the source material and trying to still find engaging stories that people love. So I'm very happy that people have stumbled onto it and have had the opportunity to learn all of these stories. Again, even if they're not interested in it, there's something beautiful in every one. For me personally, I'm also looking forward to finishing my book, which I do have a deadline of that, and the deadline is 2030. So 7 years from now, I'm in no rush, and I'm expecting tons of revisions, tons of course corrections. But the neat thing about writing the book is, again, it helps tie me to the cat. I understand that after the cat passed, I went on the hiatus. and that I didn't pick it up again until I was ready to. And it's been neat since that I've been seeing the cat again after I've started back into the book. Now, with this book, it's fantasy. It's where I love to be. I love The Lord of the Rings. I love Star Wars. I love all of these amazing, expansive things. And I want to write the best book ever. I don't want it to be too long. And if it leads into more books, great. If it actually gets published, great. If it's nothing more than I publish one copy and it sits on my shelf for the rest of my life, then it's still something I've done and something I've accomplished and something to be proud of. Now, with the book, I get tired of the same tropes over and over again. The good guy always wins, things are all right in the end, and everything kind of resolves. My book, I want to have unconventional topics. I want people to feel loss. I want people to feel mental health issues, because my character is going to be riddled with them. And I want to bring forward the whole thing of the good guy doesn't always win every time. And if they do win, it's like that old Thanos Marvel line, what did it cost? And I want to bring that Feeric explanation and that Feeric feel to everything. And again, if it never becomes anything more than something I wrote that once that's cool to me, then I'm fine with that. But like I said, I've got 7 years to go, so there's no major rush into this. And I've only recently picked it up again, but it's still cool to write every line and to get to pick the direction you want to go. And I'll say this, like even in your own personal life, sometimes you don't get to decide. When you put fingers to a keyboard or pen to paper, you get to decide, which is nice, to take those shackles off, even for a little bit. So those are the big things that are coming up with me. Highly recommend people definitely look into the podcast. Like I said, you might not find every story fascinating for you personally, but I recommend that you listen to every one, only because there's something beautiful about them all, and you just might learn something.
Absolutely, Nick. And I just want to add my own opinion here, because I'm picky. I have very little time of my own without my obligations of my kids, my work, whatever. So if I'm going to listen to a podcast, it's got to be one that captures my interest and makes me want to listen to more. And I'm not just saying this now because we've kind of become professional friends here. Because I've told you this when we're not recording. I truly enjoy what you have to say and the way you say it. I may not like all the topics, or they might not all speak to me, but the point I want to make when I'm telling people about your show is your sincerity, your detailed research, the little extras that you add to each of your episodes are really, really important, and they stand out. They make your show stand out from other shows that I would, turn off the 2 seconds after turning them on. And I also, as you know, I've told you as well, I have modeled some changes in my show after things you do in your show. And so I hope that speaks to you, that you're doing something well if somebody wants to emulate you. So that's just my 2 cents. But before we say goodbye, I really want you to tell our listeners how to find you, the best possible way to get your podcast, and reach out to you if they have any information they want to share or ask you about.
Definitely. So the easiest way to find the podcast is to look for it, whether it's Google, whether it's any podcasting service, Spotify, Google, Apple, Stitcher, or even across the pond, because I know I've got a lot of listeners in the UK and France and even down under in Australia. The easiest way to find the podcast is to look for it. So run the Insidious agenda through your search bar and you'll find it. It's a red picture, and I know it still says a paranormal podcast, but I'm working to fix that. And that being said, you'll find the entire catalog, all of my episodes right back to the beginning. And what I tell people, even when I selflessly promote my own podcast to every single new person I meet, is don't judge me by my first couple episodes. because it gets better. You'll hear a lot of clicks. You'll hear a lot of breathing. You'll hear different things. The stories are amazing. And the interesting thing too is that people will listen and they think, oh, like you don't sound the same at all when you are on the podcast versus how you are in real life. And I think it's awesome because I try to project onto the podcast a certain mood because a lot of it is not light and hard. So I want to give you that nice, deep, Insidious Agenda podcast voice when I take out a lot of what I do. But again, through the show notes, I have a link tree that I'll send you, Rianne. It basically gets you the links to all of her socials. In addition, it's also got my Insidious Agenda podcast at gmail.com email. So if you have nice things to say or things that you think I could do better, or my favorite, if you've even got subject material for a story that you want to hear, send it in there. Above all else, if you want to write an episode, I would be more than happy to tell it on air because, it's going to save me a lot of research. And as I'm reading it and presenting it, I'll learn something, and the pure shock and amazement is worth it unto itself. So yeah, the easiest way to find us, always just to look.
Well, that is a super fun offer. Have somebody write an episode and you read it in your cool voice. Wow. All right, Nick. Well, it's been so much fun having you here. I really appreciate you sharing your story today. I know you shared some really deeply personal things about yourself, but that helps people feel connected in the world. I think it also tells them who it is that's behind the Insidious Agenda reading to them every week. And that's really important. So I really, really appreciate you being here. Thank you so much.
No, and thanks so much for having me. I definitely look forward to our next conversation.